All right, so if you would have told me several months ago when we were going to do this series of messages on the 7 letters to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, that on Super Bowl Sunday we would come to the particular church at Philadelphia, I would have said, that won't ever happen. Surprise, surprise. We're actually going to talk about the church at Philadelphia, and I don't mean any particular church down in the Philly area this morning, but the one that is referenced here in the book of Revelation, chapter 3. I do think it's a good reminder, though, that God has a sense of humor, okay? So, here it is, the church at Philadelphia. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, "These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady wins the race. We've learned that line from Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare. The problem is that while we know the line, we're not very good at applying the principle of slow and steady. I mean, think about it. We want it now, right? Okay? We live in a day and age right now where next day delivery seems slow. I mean, the other week we were watching our grandkids in New Jersey, and my granddaughter came home from school and she was telling me about a book that her teacher was reading. And I said to her, "Well, let's go ahead and get you that book." I said, "It'll be here the next day." I went on to Amazon, and you know what? I could have had that book in about 4 hours. But I didn't do that because I didn't want to get a delivery from Amazon in the middle of the night. But I mean, hey, we want things now, right? Have you ever noticed that the express lane always takes longer than the other lane at the grocery store? Don't know why it is. Slow and steady may win the race, but you and I, we don't have time to wait, right? Slow and steady may sound like a good thing, but we don't have time to wait. And that is especially true when we run up against trials and challenges in our life. Okay, as I mentioned at the outset this morning, you know, we've been led to believe that life is supposed to be this meteoric line up and to the right, but life isn't like that, right? Life is like a series of ups and downs, loops and spirals, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And the really challenging part for us is that when life slaps us with a challenge or a trial, we are prone to say this, and I know you've said it because I've said it: I don't have time for this right now. Right? When you find yourself facing some kind of challenge, you're like, I don't have time for this. And then, do you know what the next thing is we usually say right after that? How long is this going to take? As though some of the challenges that we face in life are things that we can control to the degree that we can make them happen quicker so that we can get through them faster. Life requires a steady and slow pace. Life requires perseverance and endurance. And that's the lesson that comes through in all of these 7 letters to these churches in Asia Minor. Whether the disciples were hitting it out of the park or failing miserably, Jesus' words challenged every church again and again to persevere, to overcome, to patiently endure. And as we've repeated, these disciples of Jesus, all of these in all of the churches there in Asia Minor, they are all experiencing challenges to their faith and how they live out their faith. There were economic hardships. There were challenges that put them at odds with the Roman government. There were false teachers who were luring them away from their faith. And while those may not be the same challenges that you are facing right now, the reality is we all face those challenges. Maybe your challenge is that the doctor gave you a diagnosis and you've suddenly had to come front and center with this diagnosis. Maybe there is a relationship that you're in that is being challenged right now, and you're not sure how to move forward, and that is a challenge in a relationship. Maybe you're dealing with a death and how that has challenged you. Maybe it is just because of some sort of a loss that you've experienced in your life. The question that we have to ask ourselves, though, is, will I persevere through, or will I just give up? Will I persevere through, or will I just give up? Now, since it's Super Sunday, we have to include a little bit of a football analogy. And somebody said this. Somebody said that people today give up too easily. And they said, to use this football analogy, that people quit on the 1-yard line. Now, this is not going to happen in today's game. I guarantee you that the Chiefs and the Eagles will not quit on the 1-yard line. But you and I may know some people who have quit on the 1-yard line, who give up on the last minute of the game when they are 1 foot away from a winning touchdown. In today's letter, Jesus says of the disciples in Philadelphia that they have little strength. I'm going to come back to that line several times this morning. They have little strength. And when you have little strength, it is easy to give up. Think about this in your own life. You know that when you have come to a moment when life has just piled on and piled on and piled on, that you get so overwhelmed, you feel like you're going under for the last time. And when your strength is gone, you just want to give up. And when we get to that point, we can quit on the 1-yard line, or we can learn to persevere. We can learn to persevere. Now, one of the things we need to understand is that these letters, these 7 letters that we've been talking about, even though they are written to 7 specific churches, they could really be written to any church at that time, just as they can be written to us today. And what we need to understand is that whether you were a disciple of Jesus in Philadelphia or Laodicea or any other of these 7 churches, your example was just as likely to happen in one of the other churches. And so we find this theme of perseverance all throughout the New Testament as letters from Paul and others are being written to disciples of Jesus. I want to start with something that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Rome. I read the beginning of it earlier today, but here's the whole passage from Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. It says this: "We can rejoice." Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I run into a problem, I don't naturally rejoice. And I bet the same is true for you, right? When we run up against a problem, when we have some sort of a trial, whether it's as trivial as a flat tire or as life-threatening as an illness that puts us in the hospital, our natural tendency is not to rejoice. But this is what Paul says: we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop, there's our word, they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment. Now, as I said, it's just not the Apostle Paul, but James. James must have had the same thing going on in his life, because he writes this very similar thing. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." Let me ask you this morning. When was the last time you were joyful because of the trials in your life? Can't say that that's the natural thing that I want to do, right? Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. But similar line to what Paul writes, because you know that the testing of your faith produces, what's the word? Perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be what? So that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Now, like I say, when I read these passages, it's like, but this is not my natural inclination to come to a challenge or a trial in my life with joy. We just don't do that, okay? And Paul and James, these are guys who have both suffered. They have faced all sorts of things. And they are telling their readers, and they're telling us, that we need to be filled with joy. Now I'm going to come back and answer where that joy comes from in a minute. But first of all, I want to go back and I want to remind you of something that's important for all of us to know. When we face challenges that require us to persevere, it is important, it is essential for all of us to know that we are not alone. I listened to a sermon from Adam Weber the other day, and he said this one line in the sermon, and he said this: "Wounds are part of the journey." Wounds are part of the journey. Now, Adam made a very good point. He said, don't tell somebody that when they're in that part of the journey, okay? Probably isn't going to be the kind of encouraging thing. But I think we can all admit that wounds are part of the journey. He went on and he said, the important thing to remember is that the scars that we get on this journey, they are reminders that we survived. They are reminders that we survived. So if you are human, As far as I know, that makes all of you applicable to this. If you are human, you are going to be wounded because life doesn't give any of us a pass. And what you have gone through, what you are going through, what you will go through is common to everyone. Now, it can be easy to think that you are the only one who has ever gone through this. But you aren't the first, and I can guarantee you, you will not be the last. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. But let's answer the question, where's the joy come from? Okay, if Paul and James are going to tell us to be joyful when we face trials of many kinds, where's the joy come from? Well, I think joy comes very simply from, first of all, knowing that Jesus is with us. There is joy in knowing that Jesus is with us. We are not alone in the troubles that we face. Jesus is with us. You know, when we find ourselves in trying times, and oftentimes when you find yourself like at a funeral, everybody turns to Psalm 23. And why do we turn to Psalm 23? Because there is a line in there that reminds us that when we walk through the shadowy valley, what? We are not alone. We pull it into the New Testament and we say that Jesus is the one who walks with us through that shadowy valley. He doesn't go, I'm not going in there. You can go right ahead. Go by yourself. Not me. No, Jesus is the one who walks with us through the shadowy valley. And that's where our joy comes from. Knowing that we're not facing any challenge in life by ourselves. Jesus is with us. But maybe you've also heard the story about the little girl. Oh, I can remember things like this. A little girl one night woke up in the middle of the night because there was a storm going on outside. And her mom comes in and she says, "Don't worry, Jesus is with you." The little girl looked back at her mom, said the same thing that many of you have said when somebody said to you, "Jesus is with you." Mom, the little girl said to her mom, she said, "Yeah, but I want somebody with skin on. I want somebody with skin on." Look around right now. I don't see any skeletons in here. I see a lot of people with skin on. And you see, this is the other place where joy comes from. Joy comes from knowing that we are not alone in the challenges of our life, but God has given us a community of faith whereby we have somebody who will walk with us through what we're going through. And the final thing, joy comes in knowing that the worst thing isn't the last thing. That's a line from Frederick Buechner, who reminds us that the last thing is to be in the eternal presence of Jesus. And as he says, that's the best thing. That's the best thing. So the worst thing that you think you are going through right now, it is not the last thing. Now, remember when I said that it can be easy to think that you are alone in the challenges of life? Well, excuse me, if you aren't alone in your experience, then what we need to understand is that there's a reason why we're going through what we're going through. And the Apostle Paul reminds us of this when he writes to us these words You want to flip that up there from 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And you notice you won't go to your Bible and find this verse printed the way it is, because I put together part of the New International Version, part of the New Living Translation, and the last part that's in italics, I made that up because I think it should be there. Okay, just want to clear that up in case anybody's trying to figure out what I'm doing. But listen to what it says. It says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us." And this is why I say this should be added on there. When we were in trouble. If God has comforted you, you are now obliged to comfort other people. Now, this says something to me. And I think it's important for us to hear this morning. Don't be ashamed of whatever the challenge is that you are going through in life. Don't be ashamed of the challenge that you are going through in life. Now, think about this. We are good, old-fashioned Americans who pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and we don't tell anybody anything that's going on in our lives because we want to be independent and self-sufficient individuals. Am I right? That's the way we go through life. We don't tell anybody what's going on in our life. And if we don't, we miss what this verse is all about. First of all, if we're so hidden from people that they don't know that we're going through something, they will not know how to care for us. And if we never tell anybody about what's going on in our life, the people who want to care for us will not know how to care for us because they don't know what's going on. If we are going to find comfort so that we can comfort others, we have to be willing to lay it all out. And I know we don't like to do that. But that's exactly what this verse tells us we need. We need to be willing to be open and honest and transparent with one another because everybody faces challenges. And that's why, excuse me, that's why God places us in communities of faith. And I mean that in the plural, okay? Because we have a responsibility to one another to provide comfort and encouragement and learning to one another. And wherever you find yourself in relationship with other people, that is your community of faith, because that is where people are trying to understand how faith and life can come together in these most challenging and difficult times. And so your community of faith, it might be here, but it's also at your place of work. It's at the school that you go to. It is at your home. It is in the marketplace. It is everywhere. There is joy to be found in our challenges. There is joy to be found in our challenges. Joy in knowing, A, that we're not alone, and joy in knowing that our experience is going to benefit someone else, and joy in knowing that as we persevere, as we overcome, that something more is coming about in our lives. And it's what Paul referenced in that verse that we read from Romans chapter 5, that endurance develops strength of character. Rick Warren, in his Purpose-Driven Life book, wrote this. He says, God's ultimate goal for your life on earth is not comfort, but character development. And a lot of people, when they decide to start following Jesus, they're looking for an easy life. Okay? We're looking for that bed of roses kind of life. We want things to be good. I like Rick here. God's ultimate goal for your life on earth is not comfort, but character development. He goes on and he says this. He says, every time you forget that character is one of God's purposes for your life, you will become frustrated by your circumstances. You'll wonder, Rick says, why is this happening to me? Why am I having such a difficult time? One answer, he says, is that life is supposed to be difficult. In case you didn't know that, that's true. Life is supposed to be difficult because, as Rick says, that's what is enabling us to grow. It is the challenges that enable us to develop the character of Jesus within our everyday life. Can you imagine these disciples of Jesus in the city of Philadelphia who had little strength? I don't think they're thinking about their character development at that particular moment. They were probably thinking that it would have been easier to just give in and go along with the world's systems. And let me tell you, it can be easy when life is hard to just simply give in. When you are worn down, when you are weary, you are vulnerable to sacrificing your character and your integrity. But that's not what these disciples who had very little strength did. They remained faithful. They were enduring because they knew that they were not alone, and they had Jesus, they had one another, and they had a far greater hope than just this life. Now, there's a lesson here for all of us, and that is that as challenging as life is, the challenges are developing our character into the image of Jesus. And let me tell you, folks, you don't develop that kind of character by floating down the lazy river. It might be a nice thing to do on a hot afternoon at Hershey Park, but floating down the lazy river is not going to develop your character. You've got to go through the rapids. You've got to fall off your floaty and climb back up. That's where our character is developed. Listen, I love the fact that you're here on a Sunday morning. But can I tell you something? Sunday morning never developed your character. Sunday morning never developed your character. I'm going to say it one more time. Sunday morning never developed your character. Because you see, your character isn't developed until what you've heard here has to be applied out there. Your character is developed when you walk out that door and you have to be face to face with the challenges of your life. That is when your character is developed. That is when you have to endure. That is when slow and steady wins the race. Not when you're sitting in here on nice, comfortable chairs. Sorry. This might prepare you for out there, but the character development, it doesn't happen in here. It happens when you come face to face with somebody that you don't like. It happens when you get challenged. It happens when somebody tells you that something terrible is going to happen in your life. You grow as a disciple of Jesus in the moments that challenge your integrity. Now, we've all seen the devastation in Turkey and Syria during this past week, and it's just utterly unbelievable. And you know, just for the simple fact that I've been working on this message, every time I looked at these pictures, you know what I've said to myself? You really don't have any challenges. I mean, I don't care what I've gone through this week. My challenges pale in comparison to this. But you know what? This is another one of those things where God goes, let me tell you something. You know that area that is devastated right now? You know what? That's the same area that we're talking about in these letters. This area of Turkey has been experiencing these earthquakes, well, since the beginning of time. And in particular, in 17 AD, Philadelphia was one of 12 cities in Turkey that were leveled in one night. Just like what we're seeing on the news right now. Nothing. Happened again in the early 60 ADs as well. So the people who are hearing this letter from Jesus, they've lived through these earthquakes. And because they've lived through them, they've sort of developed a nomadic life, or I'm ready to get out of town in an instant kind of life. Because you see, they had to do the same thing that people are doing today in Syria and Turkey. They are living outside. They are living far away from a city that could fall upon them. And it is probably that image that they are thinking about when they hear these words from verse 12, where Jesus says to them, all who are victorious, all who overcome, all who persevere, all who patiently endure, will become pillars in the temple of my God, and they will never have to leave it. What Jesus is saying to these people is very simply, I don't care what shakes you in this life, you are living in my temple that will never be shaken. And you will never have to pack a bag to get out of town to avoid it. See, in a world that was often shaken, that left people with all sorts of daily challenges, Jesus was pointing these overcomers to the stability that awaits them in the eternal life. It was a way of reminding the people who were facing these temporary challenges that they could overcome and find joy that exists in the eternal hope that we have in Jesus. And so when they heard Jesus say that they were supposed to endure, they understood that slow and steady is what wins the race. They understood that perseverance and endurance are what gets us from day to day to day. I can guarantee you one thing, that the Eagles and the Chiefs today, they aren't going to give up on the 1-yard line. They aren't going to give up on the 1-yard line. They're going to fight through till the final whistle because they are people who have learned that they do not give up. They are looking for a joy, well, in this life that'll last for a little while. But they're looking for something more. And I think you and I need to understand that as well. That there are going to be challenges that you and I are going to face this week when we walk out these doors. And what we have to recognize is that we have a choice. We can give in or we can persevere. We can find our hope in Jesus or we can find our hope in one another. We can find our hope in things that will be shaken, or we can find our hope in what is unshakable. Slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady wins the race. Would you join me in a word of prayer?